Dr. Reggie Anderson has practiced family medicine for over 25 years, and he serves as the Chief of Staff of TriStar Ashland City Medical Center in Tennessee. It was a series of unusual experiences that led him to write this book, Appointments with Heaven, the true story of a country doctor's healing encounters with the hereafter. And we'll meet him in a moment, but first watch this.
My first experience in parting the veil was when I was in medical school, and one of the duties of the medical student was to pretty much stand by the bedside of a dying patient. So I was sitting at the bedside of Dennis at the VA hospital, just waiting for the moment. He took his last breath. I listened to his heart, which no longer had a beat, but a sudden warmth came into the room, and I could feel this other presence. And with that presence came a breath of fresh air, a breath of heaven. And a moment later, I noticed a beeping light, and then everything went silent again. But it was as if I was in the midst of something that was very miraculous, as if Dennis's soul had passed just next to me as he went into heaven's gates. What God has allowed me to do in standing and sitting by the bedside in these moments He's opened the doors and opened the foyer to heaven, to the point where I can smell and hear and feel the reality. And I can guarantee you that the reality of heaven is more solid, more vibrant than it is here.
It's a privilege to have Dr. Reggie Anderson join us now. Welcome.
Thank you.
So good to have you. And I'm so glad you're with us today and tomorrow, because we probably need a lot longer than that, but at least we have 2 days to try to unpack all that you've put in this book.
Thank you.
So, okay, Reggie, from an early age, you had a very strong God awareness. He seemed to speak to you through dreams. Tell us about that very first dream.
Sure. Well, I was raised in a very strong Christian home in South Alabama. And when I was 4.5 years old, there was a television station in Birmingham that was giving away a pony. And all we had to do was send in a postcard. And so my mom used that opportunity to teach all three of us how to write postcards and send them in the mail. And so as we were preparing the postcard, the next morning we were taking them to the post office, and I told my mom not to send my brothers and sisters in because I'd had a dream, and God told me I was going to win the pony, and I didn't want my sister and brother to be disappointed. So.
No, you're 4.5.
Right.
And you had this dream.
Right.
Now, how did your brother and sister react to that?
Well, of course, they were sort of like, Reggie, now really? But I was totally knew that that was going to happen, and 2 weeks later, the television announcement came on, and they had pulled the card out of the bin and announced Reggie Anderson, Plantersville, Alabama, has won the pony.
You won the pony,
I
just
did.
like God told you.
Absolutely. There was no doubt about it. So.
And you were raised, as you said, in a Christian family. But I'm going to fast forward a bit to high school years, because something happened, a terrible tragedy that really shook your faith.
Right. My mother's from South Georgia, and we raised watermelons during the summer, and two of my best friends were on the farm next door, and they were actually cousins of mine, Jimmy and Jerry Allday. And that's May of 1973. The most horrible thing that I could imagine happened. Both of them were murdered along with their entire family. And as a young boy of 15, I could not imagine that a good God would allow some horrible thing like this to happen to my best friends and their entire family. I mean, Jerry's wife was part of it, and she was horribly murdered. And
I think there's a photo we have of the whole family.
Yeah.
There they are.
And it was discovered later that the murderers were apprehended.
Right.
And it was a jailbreak or someone who escaped from prison.
3 escaped prisoners from Maryland had wound up in South Georgia and just did this horrible thing. So at that moment, as a 15-year-old, I couldn't understand why God would allow it if indeed there was a God. So at that moment I decided there wasn't a God, and I became an atheist.
And so how did that then start affecting your life going into
Right.
medical school?
Well, instead of going to church with my parents, I started going to the Church of Academia and started studying and having science explain life and all my questions. And so I got to medical school with that in mind, but then I was sitting in front of the cadaver in gross anatomy lab, and I looked and I said, wait a minute, this didn't just happen. The scientists were telling me a fib. It was not randomness, it was not evolution that explains this beauty, this art in front of me. There had to be an artist. And so at that moment I started looking for the artist. And a young lady had challenged my life at that time, my life as an atheist. And she gave me a book called Mere Christianity by C.S. Lewis. And I'd gone out on a date with her one time, and she would not go out with me again because I was an atheist and she was a strong believer. And I said, well, my parents are Christian, and she said, well, that doesn't count.
That doesn't count, no.
So I took that book, Mere Christianity, and I took a Bible my mother had sent me in college on a camping trip on July 4th, 1980. And I read straight through Mere Christianity, and I read the Gospel of John because this young lady had challenged me to pray that, God, if you're real, reveal yourself to me. And as soon as I closed the Bible, I fell asleep.
Now, what did you think of Mere Christianity and the book of John? Was something starting to click inside?
It was because C.S. Lewis had struggled just like I had as a young man, and he was actually an atheist as well. And he came to the conclusion that there had to be a God, very similarly as an intellectual. And I decided, well, you don't have to put away your intellect to be a Christian. But when I fell asleep, I started dreaming, just like I had dreamed as a 4.5-year-old, the most amazing, realistic dream of my life. And in that dream, Jesus came to me and he said, Reggie, why are you running from me? Your friends are here with me in paradise. And I turned, I could clearly see Jimmy and Jerry and their entire family. And they were well and healthy. They were happy, and they wanted to be where they were. They didn't want to come back to earth and be with us. And I also wanted to be with them because...
And they told you that too,
yes.
didn't they? They spoke to you.
Yeah.
They said, don't worry about us. Don't
Right.
let us hinder you from the rest of your life. What
Right.
happened to us, don't
was
let it stop
God's
you.
plan. And I could see that they were so happy, and the place that they were in was so peaceful and so real. It's still more real to me to this day than this is. This is more of a dream than that reality.
You describe in the book
Yes.
with such vivid detail what you saw in this dream.
And what
Yeah.
you smelled.
Yes.
And what you touched and
Everything,
tasted.
everything was more real and more solid. The smells were more vibrant than anything you can imagine here on earth.
And you identified some of these smells. What did you smell in heaven? in your
Citrus
dream?
and lilac. It was kind of a very refreshing, kind of like a spring day, you know, as somebody opens the door on a spring morning.
Wow.
So you wake up from this dream, you're still there on the camping trip,
Right.
and then how did you process it, and how did it, because the chapter there is called The Dream That Changed My Life. How did
Right.
that change your life?
Well, I woke up, I immediately knew I was a Christian. I totally 180 degrees from where I was. I went from being an atheist to being a Christian.
So in that dream, you did heart business with God.
Absolutely. Well, he did heart business
Heart
on
business
me.
with you.
Yeah, because he came to me even though I wasn't necessarily looking. He was the one that pulled me out of my ditch. And so I got back to civilization, and I bought a postcard, and I wrote to this young lady. I said, Karen, I have had a dream, and Jesus came to me. I became a Christian, and he told me that we would get married.
That's another part of the dream, actually, that
Yes.
you didn't share with us. But yes, what did Jesus tell you about Karen?
Well, he said that I would get married to Karen, this young lady that wouldn't even go out with me because I was an atheist. We would have 4 children, and I would practice medicine in rural Tennessee. And all of these things have come true. We have 4 children, and they're
So, and there's the family.
Yeah.
There they are today.
Yeah. And there's
What
Karen.
and there's beautiful Karen.
Yeah.
Yeah, so many years later. So God has spoken to you in dreams, revealing to you glimpses of heaven. Heaven, I'm sure you more than anyone realizes that heaven is a real, actual place.
Oh, it's more real than where we are, and I can't wait to be there. I can't wait for this moment. For my last breath here will be my first breath there.
Now, as a medical student, you started having experiences with people taking their last breath,
Right.
and these unusual kind of glimpses. Just share with us some of those early ones and what you were discovering.
Well, as in the clip that you showed earlier, there was that first experience. I was a student in the VA hospital, and as the patient, as my job was as a student was to hold the hand of the dying, basically, and come get the attending as they took their last breath. And when that happened, it was as if a door had opened, and it was instead of it being a cold, dark, dingy hospital room that was sterile, it was as if the temperature came up, and it was a spring day, and the smells that I'd smelled in that dream were there. The feeling of there was another presence in the room with me, and taking the soul of this patient.
And you could feel a breeze, you said,
Yes.
and you could feel a warmth, and you could smell. It's everything that you experienced before about
Right.
heaven was happening again.
Opened again. So I just knew that when the veil parts, it's a very thin space between here and there. And, we're not running toward eternity, but eternity walks right beside us. And it's just a very small parting between here.
And you've worked in the areas of obstetrics and gerontology, so kind of the coming and going. You experience people, life.
Right.
And are there any similarities, or what has been the experience?
Well, I realized that, the people at both ends of the spectrum, the very young and the very old, seem to have a better vision of heaven than we do in the middle, because the young are very close to where God sent them. The very elderly, their vision of, as they become deaf and as they become blind to this world, they actually get a vision of the next world. And as I'm sitting at the bedside of the dying elderly, it's almost like they get a gaze of glory, and they look past where we are, and they see into heaven.
Wow.
Now,
That's beautiful.
as
I love that.
as a medical professional, some may be watching and saying, well, hold on here. He's talking like he's using the wrong side of his brain. How do you merge kind of the medical practice and your faith?
Well, I think God has allowed me to, pretty much jumble everything into His box, because, as a medical student and as a scientist, I was trained to put everything into one box Monday through Friday and only open my faith box on Sunday. But when I became a Christian in that dream, everything got jumbled together into one box. And I think that's what God really wants us to do, is to put everything in our life into His box and not try to separate
It's
it.
beautiful. This book is beautiful. I just love how it's written. Personal stories are interwoven with other stories from other patients, your own story. It's just a beautifully written book. Okay, and there's a lot more coming tomorrow in our conversation. So I'll make sure.
Dr. Reggie Anderson, the book is Appointments with Heaven. Be sure to get your copy, and we'll see you again tomorrow.
Thank you.
Okay, stay with us.